drafted from your roll, brief and approved outline. Antarctica is almost too perfect a hiding place. A continent buried under ice. A wilderness larger than most nations. No cities, no ancient roads, no easy witnesses. Just wind, white distance, and the uncomfortable sense that anything hidden there could remain hidden for centuries. So when modern legends claim that the Knights Templar, the most famous lost order of medieval Europe, may somehow be connected to this frozen continent, the story sounds impossible. But impossibility has never stopped a legend. The real question is not whether we should believe it immediately. The real question is why the idea exists at all. Because some mysteries do not begin with evidence. They begin with absence, a missing treasure, a broken timeline, a continent that, for most of human history, sat beyond the edge of certainty. And somewhere between those empty spaces, the Templars find their way into the ice. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe, so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. Now picture the map of the world as it once was. Not clean, not complete, not obedient to the shape we know today. The Southern Ocean was a place of rumor. Antarctica was not yet a confirmed continent, but a suspicion, a blank pressure at the bottom of the world. And the Knights Templar, after their fall in the early 14th century, became something similar in the imagination, a missing piece. Their order was dismantled, their leaders destroyed, their property seized, and yet stories persisted that not everything had been found. Treasure, documents, maps, knowledge. Most of those claims remain unproven. Some are likely inventions, but legends survive for a reason. And in this one, the coldest place on Earth becomes the final vault for a question history has never fully buried. The familiar version of the Templar story ends in Europe. It ends with arrests, interrogations, confiscated estates, and the slow machinery of royal power moving against an order that had once seemed almost untouchable. For nearly 2 centuries, the Knights Templar had stood at the center of crusading Europe. Warriors, bankers, landholders, guardians of roads and pilgrims, men whose reputation was built from both piety and steel. Then, in the early 14th century, that reputation collapsed. The order was suppressed. Its leaders were condemned. Its wealth was officially absorbed, redistributed, or claimed by rulers and rival institutions. On paper, the story looks grim but tidy. The Templars rose, became powerful, fell from favor, and disappeared into the legal records of medieval Europe. But legends rarely grow out of tidy endings. They grow where the paperwork feels too clean. Because once the order was destroyed, one question became impossible to kill. What happened to everything the Templars had possessed before the trap closed? Not just gold or silver, though treasure is usually where the popular imagination runs first. People like treasure because it is simple, it has weight. It can be hidden in a chest, buried under stone, loaded onto a ship in the dark. But the more interesting possibility has always been less cinematic and more dangerous. Records, routes, contacts, maps, financial knowledge, political secrets, private agreements. The kind of things that do not glitter but can outlive the men who guarded them. Here the evidence becomes difficult. There is no accepted historical proof that a secret Templar archive was carried away to the far south. There is no reliable medieval document saying that knights of the order escaped with sacred objects and crossed unknown oceans. That part belongs to later speculation and it should be treated carefully. What we can say with more confidence is that the sudden destruction of a powerful organization created perfect conditions for rumor. When institutions vanish under pressure, they rarely vanish emotionally. Their enemies want to believe they were more corrupt than they were. Their admirers want to believe they were more enlightened than they were. And everyone, somehow, wants to believe they kept one last secret from the people who destroyed them. That is where the Templar legend begins to move. Not because history clearly sends the Knights to Antarctica, but because history leaves a gap wide enough for later storytellers to build a bridge. The bridge may be fragile. It may rest on very little, but it connects two powerful images, a vanished medieval order and a continent that seemed to wait at the end of the world. Once those images touch, the story changes shape. The Templars are no longer just monks with swords, caught in the politics of medieval France. They become carriers of something older, something portable, something that might have been moved before the official collapse. Their disappearance stops being an ending and becomes a doorway. And Antarctica, still far beyond the reach of medieval Europe in any proven sense, becomes the perfect destination in the imagination. Not because it fits the timeline easily, but because it does not. That tension matters. A believable legend often needs one foot in fact and one foot in impossibility. Too much fact, and it becomes a lecture. Too much impossibility, and it becomes fantasy. The Templar Antarctica story survives in the narrow space between the two, the documented fall of a real order, and the unverified suspicion that something escaped before the fall was complete. So before we follow the treasure ships, the strange maps, and the southern blank spaces, we need to understand this first. The secret, if there was one, did not need to stay in Europe. It only needed people to believe it could have left. A treasure is easiest to believe in when no one can point to where it ended. That is the strange advantage the Templar legend has always had. The order was wealthy, yes, but not wealthy in the simple way a pirate captain is wealthy in a tavern story. Its power was spread across estates, donations, financial networks, military holdings, legal privileges, and property that existed in many different forms. Some of it could be counted. Some of it could be seized. Some of it could be transferred on parchment. And some of it, at least in the imagination, could vanish. This is where the legend of the traveling treasure begins. According to later speculation, when the Templars sensed danger closing in, certain members may have moved valuables, documents, or sacred objects beyond the reach of the authorities. In some versions, the treasure leaves France. In others, it passes through ports, castles, or sympathetic networks. Sometimes it goes north, sometimes west. Sometimes it becomes part of another order, another family, another secret tradition. And in the most extreme versions, it does not merely leave a country, it leaves the known world. The problem is that these stories often travel farther than the evidence that supports them. They are built from fragments. The real wealth of the Templars, the real shock of their suppression, the real possibility that not every asset was immediately recovered, and the real human instinct to hide what is precious when enemies arrive. None of that proves a secret migration of treasure. It only explains why the idea feels possible. That distinction matters more than it may seem. A theory can be emotionally convincing long before it becomes historically convincing. The Templars had motive, perhaps. They had networks, certainly. They had experience moving money, Men, supplies, and information shone across long distances. They knew ports. They dealt with rulers. They operated in a world where letters, seals, and private loyalties could sometimes do what armies could not. But motive and ability are not the same as evidence. There is a quiet trap in stories like this. Once we accept that something could have happened, the mind begins to treat it as though it almost did. A hidden chest becomes a hidden archive. A hidden archive becomes forbidden knowledge. Forbidden knowledge needs a destination, and the farther away that destination is, the more powerful the story becomes. Antarctica, of course, is the farthest destination available. Not geographically in every sense, but symbolically. It is not simply distant. It is difficult. It resists ordinary imagination. A treasure buried in a European forest can be found by a farmer. A treasure sealed beneath a church might be discovered during renovation. A treasure hidden in a mountain cave invites climbers, surveyors, thieves, and local rumor. But a treasure carried into the Antarctic ice becomes almost untouchable. No casual searcher reaches it. No village tradition preserves it. No family claims to have seen the entrance. It disappears into a landscape so vast and hostile that even doubt struggles to follow. The ice itself becomes a kind of accomplice. That is why the Antarctic version of the Templar treasure story feels different from the usual Lost Hoard legend. It is not merely saying, something was hidden. It is saying, something was hidden where history cannot easily check. And yet, the more dramatic the claim becomes, the more evidence it requires. If Templar assets, documents, or sacred objects were secretly transported out of Europe, we would need some trail, a financial anomaly, a reliable witness, a cargo record, a letter written close to the events, a later inventory that clearly preserves an earlier transfer. If the claim extends to the far southern world, the standard becomes even higher. We would need evidence not only of escape, but of navigation, purpose, survival, and destination. Without that, the story remains a theory, a compelling one perhaps, a useful one, if we want to understand how legends attach themselves to historical trauma. But still a theory. There is another possibility, less glamorous but more revealing. The traveling treasure may not have been a single object at all. It may be a story that gathered many anxieties into one image. Medieval people feared the loss of holy things. Kings feared secret wealth. Later writers feared that official history had edited out the most interesting parts. Modern audiences, looking back, often suspect that powerful institutions never truly disappear. They merely change clothing. The Templars are perfect for that suspicion. They were real enough to anchor the myth, secretive enough in reputation to feed it, and destroyed violently enough to make their ending feel unfinished. Once their treasure becomes mobile, it can go anywhere the imagination needs it to go. Scotland, Portugal, the Atlantic, the Americas, the Polar South. Each destination says less about what the Templars actually did, and more about what later generations hoped might still be hidden. So when the legend points toward Antarctica, we should not follow it as believers rushing after a map. We should follow it as investigators watching a rumor evolve. Because the first clue may not be a chest, a relic, or a medieval cipher. The first clue is the journey of the story itself. The legend becomes more difficult when it reaches the water. Land leaves traces. A castle can be surveyed. A ruin can be dated. A sealed chamber, if it exists, must occupy physical space somewhere. But ships have a different quality in historical memory. They move. They depart. They disappear behind weather, distance, and bad record-keeping. And once a ship is gone, the sea becomes very good at protecting ambiguity. This is why the idea of a hidden Templar fleet has become one of the most persistent additions to the larger myth. The claim usually begins with a simple observation. The Templars were not only a military order on land. They had connections across the Mediterranean. They moved supplies, pilgrims, funds, and personnel. They operated in a world where ports mattered, where access to ships could decide whether an army survived or starved, and where maritime networks were as important as roads. From there, the story takes a sharper turn. Some later accounts suggest that, before the arrests and seizures could fully unfold, Templar ships may have left port carrying treasure, documents, or people loyal to the order. In these versions, the fleet slips away from official history. It becomes a ghost fleet, not because we can prove it sailed into the unknown, but because the absence of clear records allows the imagination to place it almost anywhere. This is where caution is essential. A hidden fleet sounds dramatic, but drama is not documentation. Medieval records are incomplete, uneven, and often frustratingly local. The fact that something does not appear clearly in surviving paperwork does not automatically mean it was deliberately erased. Sometimes a missing record is a conspiracy. More often, it is damp parchment, bureaucratic indifference, fire, war, or the ordinary carelessness of time. History loses things without needing a villain. Still, the fleet legend has power because it solves a narrative problem. If the Templars had a secret worth protecting, they needed a way to move it. A ship is the perfect answer. It can carry heavy objects, sealed boxes, people, maps, letters, and symbols. It can leave quickly. It can change destination. It can be renamed, sold, hidden in another harbor, or absorbed into the service of someone who preferred not to ask too many questions. A ship turns a local mystery into a global one, and from that point, the story begins to expand outward across the Atlantic. It brushes against theories of secret sea routes, forgotten voyages, and medieval knowledge that supposedly exceeded what official history allows. The Templars become not just fugitives, but navigators, not just guardians of treasure, but keepers of roots. The Antarctic claim is the most extreme form of this idea. To say that Templar ships escaped Europe is one thing. To say they sailed toward Antarctica is something else entirely. That claim must be marked clearly, not softened, not decorated, not smuggled into the narration as if it were merely an overlooked footnote. There is no accepted historical evidence showing that a Templar fleet reached Antarctica, mapped Antarctica, or established any presence there. And the challenge is not small. A voyage into the far southern ocean would require knowledge, preparation, and endurance far beyond a simple escape from European authorities. It would demand navigational intent. It would demand survivable routes. It would demand a reason to go there in the first place. A secret is not enough. Even conspiracies need logistics. That may be the most useful question to ask of this legend. Not, could someone imagine it, but how would it actually work? Who ordered the voyage? From which port? With what ships? Under whose command? Carrying what supplies? Following what map? Returning to tell whom? Leaving what trace? The moment we ask practical questions, the mist begins to thin. But it does not vanish completely, because maritime history is full of partial knowledge. Sailors often knew things before scholars wrote them down. Routes circulated orally. Coastlines could be rumored before they were confirmed. Maps sometimes preserved guesses beside genuine observations. The ocean was never empty of information. It was only unevenly recorded. That unevenness gives the Templar fleet legend its narrow opening, not proof, an opening. It lets later writers imagine that ships connected the destroyed order to places outside the reach of kings, popes, and official inventories. It allows the treasure to avoid confiscation. It allows the archive to survive. It allows the story to breathe past the borders of Europe. But the farther those ships sail in the legend, the less historical weight they carry. A fleet disappearing from record is mysterious. A fleet crossing into the Antarctic unknown is another kind of story, one built less on medieval evidence than on modern fascination with what the southern ice might conceal. Antarctica enters not as a documented destination, but as the ultimate blank harbor. And perhaps that is why the image remains so striking. Not knights in shining armor marching across snow. That is too theatrical, almost absurd. The stronger image is quieter. A ship at the edge of a dark ocean, its cargo unknown, its destination unwritten, leaving behind a continent where powerful men believed they had seized everything. The records do not follow it. The legend does. The map is where the story becomes dangerous. Not dangerous because a map can prove too much, but because a map can make a suspicion feel visible. A rumor spoken aloud remains vapor. A treasure story can always be dismissed as tavern smoke dressed up in Latin, but place a coastline on parchment, draw a shape where no one expects one, and suddenly the mind leans forward. There it is. Or at least, there something is. For the Templar Antarctica legend, few objects have been pulled into the mystery more often than old maps said to show knowledge of the southern world before Antarctica was officially confirmed by European explorers. The name that usually appears first is the Piri Reis map, drawn in the early 16th century by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. It is a real historical map, and it is fascinating without needing any embellishment. It drew on earlier sources, as many maps did, and it shows parts of the Atlantic world in a way that has invited generations of debate, speculation, and occasionally very confident overreading. Some writers have claimed that portions of the Piri Reis map resemble the coast of Antarctica, perhaps even Antarctica before it was covered in ice. That is a powerful claim. It is also a claim that requires more caution than it usually receives. What we can say with confidence is that early modern mapmakers often worked with mixtures of observation, copied material, educated guesswork, inherited geography, and blank space disguised as certainty. A map was not always a photograph of knowledge. Sometimes it was an argument. Sometimes it was a negotiation between what had been seen, what had been reported, what older authorities suggested, and what the mapmaker believed must exist to make the world feel balanced. That last point matters. For centuries, many European geographical traditions imagined a great southern land, Terra Australis, not because sailors had clearly mapped Antarctica, but because thinkers believed the world might require a counterweight in the south to balance the known lands of the north. This was not absurd in its own intellectual context. It was a theory shaped by the tools and assumptions available at the time. But it means that southern-looking land on an old map does not automatically equal Antarctica. Sometimes a coastline is a coastline. Sometimes it is a guess wearing the clothes of precision. And sometimes, later readers bring Antarctica to the map before the map ever brings Antarctica to them. That is the quiet problem with using old maps as evidence for hidden history. They invite projection. A strange curve becomes a lost coast. A distorted island becomes a buried continent. A decorative uncertainty becomes a coded message. The map begins as a document, but ends as a mirror, reflecting the thing we hoped to find. Still, it would be too easy to dismiss the fascination entirely. Old maps are unsettling because they remind us that knowledge does not move in a straight line. People can know fragments before they understand the whole. Sailors can carry practical information that scholars never fully record. Cartographers can preserve rumors from vanished voyages. A map may be wrong in one place, careful in another, and mysterious in a third. The past was not stupid. It was uneven. This unevenness is exactly where the Antarctica legend finds oxygen. If an old map seems to suggest a southern land, and if the Templars are imagined as guardians of lost knowledge, then the story begins to stitch them together. Perhaps, the theory says, the Templars possessed older charts. Perhaps those charts came through contact with distant cultures, Mediterranean trade, or the wider exchange of knowledge during the crusading centuries. Perhaps the Order did not discover Antarctica, but inherited some fragment of geographical memory. Each, perhaps, is doing a great deal of work. There is no accepted evidence tying the Knights Templar directly to the Piri race map. There is no verified chain of documents showing that Templar maps passed into Ottoman cartography. There is no reliable medieval Templar chart of Antarctica sitting in an archive, quietly waiting for a dramatic violin cue. The connection is speculative, not impossible in the broad, imaginative sense, but unsupported in the strict historical sense. And strict history is the only kind that can carry a claim this heavy. What the maps do offer is something subtler. They show why Antarctica was available to the imagination before it was fully available to exploration. The southern continent did not enter human thought all at once. It gathered itself slowly, first as theory, then as rumor, then as distant observation, then as confirmation. Long before ships could safely describe it, the idea of a hidden southern land had already taken root. That makes Antarctica different from a normal destination. In the legend, it is not only a place. It is a possibility that existed before proof, a blank with a name, a suspicion with latitude, a shape waiting for evidence. And when a place exists like that, half imagined, half expected, it becomes easy to fold other mysteries into it. The Templar treasure can go there. The lost archive can go there. The forbidden map can point there. Not because the evidence leads cleanly south, but because the South had already become the proper home for things the known world could not explain. This is why the map matters. Not because it solves the mystery, because it teaches us how the mystery learned to look real. Long before Antarctica became a continent with borders on school maps, it existed as a thought experiment, a shadow in the South. To modernize, this can be hard to appreciate. We live after the age of satellites. We are used to the arrogance of complete outlines. A child can open a globe and see Antarctica as a white cap at the bottom of the planet, as if it had always been there waiting politely for human confirmation. But older map makers lived in a more unstable world. The edges of geography were not merely unknown, they were negotiable. And into that uncertainty came the idea of Terra Australis, the southern land. For centuries, many scholars and cartographers believed there might be a vast landmass below the known world. Not necessarily Antarctica, as we understand it now. Not a measured continent of ice and research stations. More like a balancing presence, a theoretical weight imagined beneath the oceans, helping complete the symmetry of the Earth. It was geography shaped partly by observation, partly by inheritance, and partly by the human discomfort with empty space. That discomfort is important. Blankness has never been neutral on a map. A blank space can mean humility. We do not know. But it can also feel like an accusation. It reminds the viewer that knowledge has limits. Map makers, patrons, explorers, and readers often preferred a confident mistake to an honest void. So unknown regions became populated with guessed coastlines, sea monsters, decorative winds, mythical islands, and continents that seemed to exist first because the imagination needed somewhere to put them. Terra Australis was not one single claim. It was more like a long geographical mood. Sometimes it appeared as a massive southern continent wrapping around the lower world. Sometimes it shifted shape. Sometimes it absorbed real discoveries and misunderstood reports. Sometimes it was reduced, corrected, or pushed farther away as exploration improved. The idea changed because the map changed, and the map changed because the world kept refusing to fit neatly into inherited theories. This is one of the reasons old maps can feel so haunted. They do not simply show what people knew. They show what people expected to be true. They preserve the pressure of assumptions. They reveal the moment when imagination and measurement were still sharing the same ink. And that is precisely why Terra Australis became fertile ground for later hidden history theories. When people look backward and see a southern continent drawn before Antarctica was officially confirmed, they sometimes treat it as a secret exposed too early. The reasoning is tempting. If someone drew land in the south before modern discovery, perhaps someone had older knowledge. If older knowledge existed, perhaps it was preserved by a secretive order. And if a secretive order had it, the Templars are never far from being invited into the room. But this is where the legend quietly changes the rules. A theoretical southern land is not the same thing as a mapped Antarctica. A guessed continent is not proof of a medieval voyage. A cartographic tradition is not a hidden archive. The resemblance may be intriguing, but resemblance alone is a very fragile witness. Still, Terra Australis does give us something valuable. It shows that Antarctica did not arrive suddenly in the human imagination. The idea of a southern land had a long prehistory. People made space for it mentally before they reached it physically. They drew the possibility before they touched the ice. That may sound like a small distinction, but it changes the whole mystery. Because if Antarctica already existed as a suspected place, then later legends did not have to invent it from nothing. They only had to attach older fears and older secrets to a blank that was already waiting. The Templar treasure did not need a proven route south in order to become believable to modern mythmakers. It needed a destination that felt ancient, remote, and strangely prefigured by maps that seemed to know more than they should. Terra Australis provided that atmosphere. It was the world's lower margin, the place where certainty thinned out. It belonged to scholars and sailors, but also to dreamers, mystics, imperial planners, and anyone who looked at a map and wondered whether the unknown was truly empty. In that sense, the Southern Shadow was never just about land. It was about permission. Permission to imagine that history might be deeper than its surviving records. Permission to suspect that discovery is sometimes only rediscovery. Permission to believe that the clean timeline in the textbook may have rougher edges than it admits, and yet, permission is not proof. That is the line we have to keep returning to, not because it ruins the story, but because it keeps the story honest. The old map makers who drew Terra Australis were not necessarily preserving Templar secrets. They were working inside the intellectual world they inherited, filling unknown spaces with theories that seemed reasonable to them. Their southern land was sometimes a hypothesis, sometimes a convention, sometimes a mistake. But mistakes can have long afterlives. A coastline drawn from theory can become, centuries later, evidence in someone else's mystery. A blank space can harden into a secret. A geographical suspicion can become the stage for a medieval order that never demonstrably went there. That is how legends accumulate weight. Not all at once. Not from one forged document or one dramatic claim, but from layers. An old theory, a strange map, a vanished order, a missing treasure, a continent difficult to check, and the persistent feeling that the official story may have left something out. Terra Australis was the shadow before the ice. And once that shadow existed, it became much easier for later generations to imagine that someone, perhaps even the Templars, had seen what the rest of the world was still only guessing. The timeline is where the ice begins to crack. Not the Antarctic ice, which has survived far worse than a medieval conspiracy theory, but the ice beneath the legend itself. Because once the story has carried us through treasure, ships, maps, and the old dream of Terra Australis, it meets a problem that cannot be brushed aside with atmosphere. The Knights Templar were destroyed in the early 14th century. Antarctica was not confirmed by European explorers until centuries later. Between those two facts lies a gap large enough to swallow almost every easy version of the story. This does not mean the legend must be thrown away without examination, but it does mean the legend has to work much harder than most versions of it are willing to work. It cannot simply point to a mysterious map and declare victory. It cannot say the Templars vanished, Antarctica was unknown, therefore something must connect them. That is not investigation. That is a shortcut wearing a cloak. And shortcuts are dangerous in hidden history. They let the most exciting possibility skip past the most important question. How would the knowledge have crossed the gap? The official history, in its broad outline, is not mysterious here. The Templar Order was suppressed after a campaign that began in 1307, and its formal existence was ended soon afterward. Its members did not simply evaporate, of course. Some were imprisoned. Some were absorbed into other orders. Some returned to ordinary life where that was possible, and some became figures in later rumor. But the institution itself, as a recognized medieval military order, did not continue openly into the age of Antarctic exploration. That matters, because a surviving symbol is not the same as a surviving organization. A story told about the Templars is not the same as a Templar record. A later group borrowing their imagery does not prove the original knights carried secrets across centuries. History is full of names that outlive the people who first wore them, and the Templars, more than most, became a name that later generations could reuse. This is one reason the Antarctica claim feels both thrilling and unstable. It asks the viewer to imagine a chain of custody for knowledge or treasure that stretches across vast distances and long periods of time, yet the chain itself is almost never shown. We are given the first link, the real Templars. We are given the final image, the frozen South. But the links in between are often missed. Who preserved the maps? Who knew what they meant? Who kept the secret after the Order's destruction? Who passed it along without leaving records strong enough to convince historians? And if the knowledge was so carefully guarded, why does it appear only as a modern legend rather than as a medieval document with a date, a hand, a provenance, and a context? These questions are not meant to drain the story of wonder. They are meant to keep the wonder from becoming careless. Because the truth is, chronology is one of the great enemies of beautiful theories. It does not care whether an idea feels meaningful. It does not care whether two mysteries look elegant beside each other. It simply asks whether the dates can be made to live in the same room. Here, they struggle. For the Templars to have had meaningful knowledge of Antarctica, one of several difficult things would have to be true. They would have needed access to older geographic information that accurately described a southern continent, or they would have needed contact with someone who possessed such information, or they would have needed a maritime capability and purpose far beyond what the surviving evidence supports, or in the most extreme version, they would have needed to reach the region themselves. Each possibility is dramatic. Each possibility is also unsupported by accepted evidence. That does not make them equally impossible. History has surprises. Archives have delivered embarrassments to certainty before. Sailors reached places before officials announced them. Knowledge has moved through trade, war, translation, rumor, and accident. We should never pretend that the surviving record is complete. But an incomplete record is not a blank check. This is the discipline the legend resists. It wants the missing evidence to count as evidence. It wants silence to suggest concealment. It wants a gap to become a tunnel. But gaps are not tunnels unless something passes through them and leaves a trace. And so the timeline gives us the central tension of the entire mystery. On one side, there is the strange afterlife of the Templars, their missing wealth, their abrupt destruction, their reputation for secrecy, their ability to attract every forbidden object in the Western imagination. On the other, there is Antarctica, remote, suspected before it was confirmed, drawn in distorted forms on speculative maps, and powerful enough to make any secret placed there feel enormous. The two fit symbolically. They do not fit historically, at least not with the evidence we currently have. That difference is the heart of the problem. A symbol can cross centuries without a passport. A historical claim cannot. It needs documents, dates, places, witnesses, and material traces. It needs more than resonance. It needs friction with the real world, and this legend has plenty of resonance. The fallen order, the missing treasure, the ancient map, the frozen vault. It is almost too well designed. That should make us more careful, not less. Good stories often feel inevitable after someone has assembled them, but history rarely arrives so neatly packaged. Real evidence is awkward. It has torn edges. It contradicts itself. It refuses to pose perfectly in the moonlight. The Templar Antarctica theory, at least in its strongest form, asks us to accept a beautifully arranged mystery with a very thin bridge across time. That bridge may be the most revealing part of all, because what it shows is not that the Templars reached the ice. It shows how badly later imagination wanted them to have escaped the limits of their own century. The legend does not want the Order to die in court records and confiscations. It wants them to sail beyond the map, carrying something the world was not ready to understand. There is a human ache in that. We dislike endings that feel bureaucratic. We prefer secret departures to legal dissolutions. We prefer a hidden fleet to an inventory list. And we definitely prefer an Antarctic vault to the dreary possibility that most of the treasure was simply seized, reassigned, spent, melted down, or absorbed into other hands. The timeline is cruel because it makes the story smaller. But it also makes the story more interesting, because now the mystery is no longer just, did the Templars go to Antarctica? The better question is, why do we keep trying to send them there, even when the dates resist us? That question leads somewhere colder than geography. It leads into the way legends defend themselves against history. If the dates do not fit easily, the legend has only one place left to go. Older knowledge. This is the doorway almost every ambitious version of the story eventually tries to open. The Templars, it suggests, did not need to discover Antarctica themselves. They may have inherited something, a chart, a fragment, a maritime tradition, a set of coordinates without a modern name attached. Some piece of geographical memory carried through older civilizations, trade routes, crusading contact, or cultures whose knowledge never entered European archives in a neat and recognizable form. It is an elegant solution, perhaps too elegant, because it moves the burden of proof one step backward. Instead of asking whether medieval Templar ships reached the far south, we ask whether the Order possessed maps or information from people who had. That sounds more reasonable at first. Knowledge travels more easily than fleets. A document can cross a desert. A rumor can survive in a port city. A copied map can outlive the ship that produced it. The medieval world was not sealed off into isolated compartments. The Mediterranean, especially, was a place of exchange, commercial, military, religious, linguistic, and intellectual. Crusaders encountered cultures older and more sophisticated than many later myths are willing to admit. Goods moved. Mathematics moved. Medical knowledge moved. Stories moved. So did navigational ideas, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes through translation, sometimes stripped from their original context. That part is believable in a broad sense. But broad believability is not the same as a specific Templar connection to Antarctica. The evidence is thinner here. We have to be careful not to turn knowledge could travel into this exact knowledge did travel into these exact hands with this exact destination. That is where speculation quietly disguises itself as reconstruction. It begins with a true statement about cultural exchange and ends with a secret Antarctic archive. The middle is where the floorboards creak. Still, this version of the legend is worth examining because it reveals a real misunderstanding about the past. People often imagine medieval Europe as blind, small, and almost comically ignorant until a sudden burst of exploration opened the world. That picture is too simple. Medieval people could be wrong in ways that were profound, but they were not empty-headed. Merchants, sailors, scholars, pilgrims, diplomats, and soldiers all carried information across long distances. Ports were listening posts. Monasteries copied texts. Courts wanted maps. Traders remembered winds, currents, islands, and coastlines when such knowledge meant profit or survival. The world was wider than the official maps. But again, wider does not mean Antarctic. For the Templars to have possessed meaningful southern knowledge, we would need a stronger trail. Not just the fact that they operated in a connected world, but a document showing that they acquired unusual geographical material. Not just a later claim that secret maps existed, but an object that can be dated, traced, and studied. Not just a coastline that looks suggestive to a modern eye, but a clear chain linking that image to the order. Without that chain, the theory remains. And uncertainty is not failure. It is simply the honest temperature of the evidence. There is another reason the older maps idea is so attractive. It flatters us. It lets us believe that history has hidden superior knowledge in the ruins of defeated groups. The Templars become more than a religious military order. They become librarians of a vanished world. Their treasure becomes less about gold and more about forbidden understanding. And Antarctica becomes not a destination, but a test of whether civilization once knew more than it later remembered. That is a powerful mythic pattern. Lost wisdom, broken transmission, a secret order, a map no one was supposed to see. You can find variations of this pattern almost everywhere in modern hidden history storytelling. It does not always begin with fraud. Often it begins with a genuine discomfort. The awareness that the surviving record is incomplete, that conquerors destroy libraries, that oral knowledge disappears, that official histories favor the literate and powerful. These are real problems. They deserve respect, but a real problem does not validate every solution offered to it. Yes, knowledge can be lost. Yes, ancient and medieval peoples sometimes achieved things later generations underestimated. Yes, the past contains gaps. But each proposed recovery of lost knowledge must stand on its own evidence. Otherwise, every gap becomes a storage room for whatever mystery we most want to preserve. The Templars are vulnerable to this because their historical identity already sits at a crossroads. Religion, war, money, secrecy, accusation, martyrdom, and suppression. Add older maps, and they become almost magnetized. Every stray symbol, every unproven voyage, every strange line on parchment can be pulled toward them. But we should ask a quieter question. Why the Templars? If an older map of the far south existed, why assume it reached this order specifically? Why not merchants, Islamic geographers, Iberian sailors, Mediterranean pilots, monastic scholars, court cartographers? Why does the legend select the Templars as the vessel? Partly because they feel designed for secrecy. Their fall makes them available. Their silence after suppression invites projection. Their reputation, swollen by centuries of fiction and esoteric reinvention, gives them a dramatic authority that a normal merchant guild does not possess. A lost map in the hands of a trader is interesting. A lost map in the hands of the Templars feels like a warning. That emotional difference does much of the work. And yet behind the exaggeration, there is one idea worth keeping. Knowledge does not always announce itself when it moves. It can pass through enemies, translators, prisoners, sailors, and copyists. It can be misunderstood by the people who preserve it. A map can be copied long after its original source is forgotten. A real coastline can become distorted until it looks mythical. A myth can preserve a memory after losing its coordinates. Those possibilities are not proof of Antarctica. They are reminders to be humble. The strongest, honest version of the theory would not claim that Templar knights marched across the polar ice, or that a fortress waits beneath a glacier with a red cross carved above the gate. It would ask a more restrained question. Could fragments of older geographic knowledge have circulated through medieval networks? And could later legends have attached those fragments to the Templars because the order seemed capable of guarding them? That is possible in the broadest sense. It is also unproven, and perhaps that is the only stable ground here, a narrow ledge between arrogance and gullibility. We should not laugh too quickly at the idea that the medieval world held more knowledge than survives in our textbooks. But we should not let that humility become permission to accept every beautiful claim. The Templars may have known more than we think, but more is not the same as Antarctica, and until a dated document, a credible map tradition, or a material trace appears, the southern ice remains less a destination in their history than a destination in our imagination. That may sound like a retreat. It is not. It is the moment the mystery becomes more honest, and in a strange way, more human. Because the real story may not be about what the Templars carried to the bottom of the world. It may be about why we keep placing lost knowledge in the hands of the vanished. Antarctica does not need a legend to feel secretive. It does that work all by itself. Even stripped of every Templar rumor, every vanished fleet, every suspicious map, the continent has a kind of natural secrecy built into it. It is remote in a way few places on Earth still are. It is hostile without being dramatic about it. It does not need traps, guardians, or ancient curses. The cold is enough. The distance is enough. The scale is enough. Most hidden places invite approach. Antarctica discourages it. That difference is one reason it works so powerfully in stories like this. A castle ruin asks to be entered. A cave asks to be explored. A desert temple suggests that somewhere, under enough sand, there may be a door. But Antarctica is not a door. It is a refusal. It turns the entire landscape into a boundary. And for the imagination, a boundary is almost as useful as a clue. When people imagine secrets under the ice, they are not simply responding to the possibility of concealment. They are responding to the feeling of inaccessibility. Antarctica is one of the few places where a person can still look at a map and sense that ordinary human curiosity has limits. You cannot simply drive there. You cannot wander into the interior with a backpack and a heroic playlist. You cannot ask a local old man what he saw when he was a child. There are no ancestral villages, no crowded markets, no casual witnesses sitting outside with tea. There is weather. There is ice. There is distance measured not only in miles, but in permission, equipment, money, and survival. This makes Antarctica a perfect natural vault in the mythology of secrecy. Not because a vault has been proven there, but because the continent behaves like one. It seals. It preserves. It buries. It makes recovery difficult. It turns absence into atmosphere. And unlike a man-made vault, it does not announce who built it. That is useful for a legend. If someone claims a medieval treasure was hidden in a known fortress, the claim can be tested against ownership, architecture, documents, excavation, and local history. If someone claims the same treasure was taken beneath Antarctic ice, the claim becomes harder to confront emotionally. The answer may still be no, but the no has to travel through blizzards. The setting itself begins to defend the story. That is not evidence, of course. It is psychology. But psychology is part of why legends survive. A hidden history theory needs more than a claim. It needs a stage that feels worthy of the claim. The Templars already provide one half of the drama: secrecy, persecution, missing wealth, and the suspicion that official power did not recover everything. Antarctica provides the other half: a landscape where the absence of visible proof can be mistaken for the presence of hidden truth. This is where the story becomes less medieval and more modern, because medieval people did not need Antarctica in the way modern audiences do. For them, the far south was barely a practical destination in the imagination. For us, Antarctica is known and unknown at the same time. We have satellite images, scientific bases, expedition footage, climate data, aircraft routes, international agreements, beautiful documentaries narrated over sweeping aerial shots. And yet, for most of us, it remains unreachable. That combination is potent. A place can be mapped and still feel forbidden. It can be photographed and still feel concealed. It can be studied intensely by specialists and still remain, to the public imagination, a white space at the edge of trust. Antarctica is not unknown because no one has seen it. It is unknown because almost no one can verify it personally. That gap between expert knowledge and ordinary access is where suspicion often grows. The mind begins to ask, what else is there? What is beneath the surface? What do the maps leave out? What do the research stations know? What might be hidden in a place where nature itself keeps people away? The Templar legend feeds on those questions, but it does not create them. It merely gives them a medieval face, a red cross on a white field, a lost order under a white continent. The symbolism is almost too neat, which is usually a warning sign, but it is also why the image sticks. The Templar-Antarctica connection is not persuasive because it has strong evidence. It is persuasive to some because the two symbols seem to recognize each other. One is a vanished order. The other is a continent that hides by existing. There is also something deeper in the appeal of ice. Ice is not like soil. Soil suggests decay, roots, insects, time breaking things down. Ice suggests preservation. It promises that what disappears into it may not be destroyed, only suspended. A body, a ship, a tool, a message. The cold can make the past feel recoverable. Frozen history seems less dead than waiting. That is why the idea of a Templar secret beneath Antarctica feels different from a secret buried anywhere else. It is not merely hidden. It is preserved beyond ordinary time. The ice turns the legend into a kind of suspended sentence, one that history has not finished reading. But again, the very power of the image should make us careful. A setting that feels convincing can trick us into accepting a story that is not. Antarctica's remoteness does not prove the presence of Templar artifacts. Its ice does not authenticate a medieval voyage. Its hostility does not turn speculation into archaeology. A place can be perfect for hiding something and still hide nothing of the kind. The continent does not confirm the legend. It explains why the legend chose the continent, and that may be more revealing. Because when we say Antarctica is a natural vault, we are also admitting something about ourselves. We need places where mystery can still survive. We need at least one region of the map that does not feel fully domesticated by roads, cameras, and instant answers. The modern world has made secrecy harder to imagine. Antarctica gives secrecy a landscape large enough to breathe in. So the Templars are sent there, not by medieval records, but by modern longing. Longing for hidden continuity. Longing for lost knowledge. Longing for the possibility that history has not been completely searched. The ice becomes a screen, and onto that screen we project whatever we fear was taken from us: truth, treasure, origin, proof, meaning. That is why Antarctica works. Not because it answers the Templar mystery, but because it deepens it without saying a word. It allows the legend to remain just out of reach, which is exactly where legends are strongest. Too close, and they can be inspected. Too far, and they become fantasy. Antarctica sits in the perfect middle distance, visible to the world, unreachable to most of it. A natural vault does not need a lock. Sometimes all it needs is a horizon no one can cross easily. Modern Antarctica is not empty. That is one of the details that complicates the fantasy. The popular image is a blank white continent, untouched and waiting. But the real Antarctica is also a working landscape of science, logistics, treaties, aircraft, fuel depots, ice roads, field camps, protected areas, and research stations belonging to many nations. It is remote, yes. It is dangerous, yes. But it is not simply a frozen void where anything could be hidden without consequence. And strangely, that makes the legend stronger. Because secrecy does not always grow from total absence. Sometimes it grows from partial visibility. A thing glimpsed from a distance can feel more suspicious than a thing never seen at all. If Antarctica were only an unreachable mythic wasteland, the imagination would have less to grip. But because we know there are bases there, because we know governments operate there, because we know movement is restricted and regulated, the continent begins to feel like a place with doors. And doors make people wonder who has the keys. This is where modern Antarctic reality and modern conspiracy thinking begin to overlap, even when they should not. Research stations exist for reasons that are not mysterious. Climate science, astronomy, geology, biology, ice core research, atmospheric studies, and the practical need to support people working in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They are expensive to build, difficult to supply, and often visually unromantic. A lot of Antarctic life is less ancient secret chamber and more someone please fix the generator before the wind gets worse. But from the outside, distance changes the meaning of ordinary things. A restricted zone becomes suspicious. A protected area becomes forbidden. A military-looking aircraft becomes evidence of something hidden. A station with antennas becomes a listening post in the imagination. Even the plain language of logistics, permits, environmental rules, flight corridors, seasonal access, can begin to sound like a cover story when heard by someone already prepared to distrust official explanations. This is not unique to Antarctica. Every difficult place produces rumors. Mountains do it. Deserts do it. Deep forests do it. The ocean does it constantly, with enthusiasm. When access is limited, people often confuse difficulty with concealment. And Antarctica may be the strongest version of that pattern, because almost everything about it is naturally limiting. The environment itself imposes restrictions before any government does. That distinction is easy to miss. People may hear that travel is regulated and imagine a secret being guarded. But in Antarctica, regulation often begins with survival and conservation. The continent is fragile in ways that are not obvious from afar. Its ecosystems can be disturbed. Its weather can kill quickly. Rescue is difficult. Waste management matters. Fuel spills matter. Footsteps in certain environments can matter more than a casual visitor expects. Rules are not automatically proof of hidden history. Often, they are proof that humans are messy, and Antarctica is very bad at forgiving mess. Still, those rules help the legend survive. Because a story about something hidden needs barriers. It needs the listener to feel that verification is difficult. It needs the answer to remain beyond personal reach. And modern Antarctica provides barriers that are real, even if the interpretation placed on them is often exaggerated. This is the important point. The restrictions are real. The Templar conclusion is not. There are research stations. There are protected areas. There are places most people will never visit. There are maps that ordinary viewers will not study in detail. There are logistical corridors and scientific zones and international arrangements that make Antarctica feel governed by distant systems. All of that can feed the impression of secrecy. But none of it proves that Templar bases exist. There is no accepted evidence of a medieval fortress under the ice. No verified excavation has produced Templar artifacts in Antarctica. No authenticated medieval document places the order there. No credible archaeological record shows that knights, monks, fugitives, or treasure fleets established a presence on the continent. The legend survives not because those proofs have appeared, but because the setting makes their absence feel negotiable. Someone can always say, perhaps it is in a restricted zone. Perhaps the evidence was found and suppressed. Perhaps the base is beneath the ice where no one is allowed to drill. Perhaps the map has been altered. Perhaps the photographs do not show everything. The word perhaps does not build evidence, but it does build atmosphere. And atmosphere is often enough to keep a story alive online, especially when the story already contains powerful ingredients. The Templars, missing treasure, old maps, government stations, polar silence, and the idea that ordinary citizens are being kept away from the final answer. It is a very modern mixture. Medieval symbols carried by modern suspicion into a scientific landscape most people only know through documentaries and satellite images. There is an irony here. The more scientists study Antarctica, the more mysterious it can feel to people outside that world. Not because science is hiding something, but because specialization creates distance. Ice cores, subglacial lakes, meteorites, atmospheric data. These are extraordinary subjects, but they require expertise to understand. To a patient viewer, they reveal a continent full of real wonders. To a suspicious one, they can look like fragments of a locked room. And the real wonders are often better than the invented ones. Antarctica preserves climate history in its ice. It contains meteorites that help scientists study the solar system. It hides lakes beneath glaciers, shaped by pressure and darkness rather than medieval design. It holds records of Earth's atmosphere written in frozen layers, year by year, long before any Templar seal was pressed into wax. The continent is not empty of secrets. It is full of them. But they are mostly natural secrets, scientific secrets, secrets that require instruments rather than swords to uncover. They do not need a vanished order to become meaningful. That may be the quiet disappointment behind the conspiracy version. The real Antarctica is mysterious, but not in the way legend wants it to be. Its mysteries are slow, technical, patient, and often indifferent to human drama. They tell us about climate, evolution, geology, survival, and time. The Templar myth tries to humanize the ice by placing intention beneath it. A vault, a plan, a hidden hand. Nature rarely offers that kind of neatness. So modern bases and blank spaces become props in an older emotional story. The suspicion that someone knows more than they are saying. In that story, Antarctica is not a continent under international scientific cooperation. It is a locked archive. The researchers become guards, the protected zones become curtains, the silence becomes policy. But that is interpretation, not evidence, and good investigation has to separate the two. A restricted place can be restricted for ordinary reasons. A blank space on a public map can reflect safety, scale, season, or environmental protection rather than concealment. A government presence can support research without implying an ancient treasure. The fact that most of us cannot go somewhere does not mean the place contains what we imagine. Yet the feeling remains, and feelings have power in legend. They decide which stories are repeated, which images are remembered, which claims are treated as interesting long after the evidence has failed to grow. Antarctica's modern reality gives the Templar story just enough texture to keep breathing. Not proof texture. A station light in the polar night. A runway carved into ice. A zone marked off for reasons few outsiders will ever personally test. For a careful historian, these are details of administration, science, and survival. For the hidden history imagination, they are the edges of a sealed chapter. And somewhere between those two readings, the legend continues to move. Not across medieval seas now, but across forums, videos, late-night conversations, and the older human suspicion that the most remote places must be remote for a reason. The Templars did not remain only in the Middle Ages. That may be the single most important reason their legend keeps surviving. Historically, the order belonged to a specific world: crusading warfare, medieval finance, papal authority, aristocratic patronage, and the violent politics of Christian Europe. But symbolically, the Templars escaped that world. Long after the original order was suppressed, their image kept moving across books, rituals, fraternal traditions, esoteric speculation, political fantasy, and popular entertainment. The Knights disappeared as an institution, but the symbol refused to stay buried. A red cross, a white mantle, a vow of secrecy, a dramatic fall, accusations whispered in courts, wealth that seemed too great to vanish cleanly. These ingredients were too useful for later imaginations to leave alone. Over time, the Templars became less a medieval order than a container. Different groups placed different meanings inside them. For some, they became martyrs. For others, heretics. For others, guardians of hidden wisdom. For others still, a convenient costume for any story that needed ancient authority, coded rituals, and a sense that the official version of history had been edited by nervous men in expensive rooms. This is where the line between inheritance and invention becomes important. Later secret societies and esoteric traditions sometimes borrowed Templar imagery. Popular culture borrowed even more. The name Templar began to carry an atmosphere of secrecy, whether or not there was a real historical connection underneath it. And once a symbol becomes that powerful, people often mistake the survival of the symbol for the survival of the original organization. But those are not the same thing. A modern group using Templar language does not prove that medieval Templars continued in an unbroken chain. A ritual reference does not prove a secret archive. A cross on a banner does not prove a hidden command structure stretching from the 14th century to the polar ice. Symbols can be adopted, repurposed, misunderstood, romanticized, and sold on badly designed merchandise without carrying the full weight of history. That last part is not mystical. It is just branding with a sword. Still, the symbolic afterlife of the Templars matters because it helps explain how Antarctica enters the story. Once the order becomes associated with secret societies, hidden initiations, forbidden teachings, and lost knowledge, it becomes available for almost any mystery that needs an ancient sponsor. The Templars can be attached to treasure legends, cathedral codes, alternative histories of exploration, sacred bloodlines, occult manuscripts, and eventually, frozen continents. The connection may not be historical, but it is culturally efficient. The Templars do a kind of narrative labor. They make a mystery feel older. They give it a medieval seal. They suggest that whatever is hidden was not hidden yesterday, or by accident, but guarded across generations by people who understood the true shape of history. That feeling can be intoxicating. It turns scattered speculation into a lineage. And lineage is one of the things secret history stories crave most. A secret without lineage is just a rumor. A secret with lineage feels like a tradition. It gains ancestors. It gains protectors. It gains the illusion of depth. This is why later Templar mythology often works backward. A modern mystery is chosen first. A strange map, a buried object, a polar rumor, an unexplained symbol. And then the Templars are brought in afterward to give it age and authority. The order becomes less a subject of investigation and more a stamp of mystery applied to whatever the storyteller wants to elevate. That does not mean every later reference to the Templars is dishonest. Far from it. Symbols naturally evolve. People use the past to speak about themselves. A fraternal order may adopt medieval language to express ideals of loyalty, discipline, charity, or spiritual warfare. A novelist may use Templar imagery because readers immediately understand the mood it creates. A historian may examine the real order precisely because the myth has become so inflated. The problem begins when symbolic inheritance is treated as historical continuity. One is a trace of influence. The other is a claim about survival. And survival requires evidence. This distinction is especially important in the Antarctic legend because the story often depends on a blurred chain. Medieval Templars fall. Later secret traditions admire or imitate them. Modern conspiracy culture mixes those traditions with maps, lost civilizations, and polar secrecy. Then the whole bundle is presented as though it were one continuous hidden institution, moving patiently through time. But when we look closely, the chain is not iron, it is rope. Knotted from different centuries, different motives, different stories, and different kinds of evidence. Some knots are historical, some are symbolic, some are literary, some are pure speculation. The rope may hold as mythology, but it cannot carry the weight of a factual claim unless we know which strand is which. That is why the Templars are so often misunderstood. Their real history is already fascinating, but their legend has become more convenient than their reality. The real order was complicated, disciplined, political, wealthy, vulnerable, and ultimately destroyed by forces larger than itself. The mythic order is cleaner. It can know anything, survive anything, hide anything, and appear anywhere a mystery requires it, including Antarctica. In that sense, the Antarctic story is not a strange outlier. It is the logical endpoint of a long process. Once the Templars are transformed from medieval monks and warriors into universal guardians of lost truth, no destination is too remote. The ice is simply the grandest stage available. And perhaps that should make us pause. Because the more adaptable a theory becomes, the less it may be explaining. If the Templars can be connected to every secret, every map, every hidden treasure, every underground chamber, every forbidden archive, and every blank space on Earth, then the connection begins to lose meaning. A key that opens every lock may not be a key at all. It may be a story we keep reshaping because we enjoy the sound it makes in the door. Still, there is a reason people return to it. The Templars represent a fantasy of continuity beneath collapse. Their historical destruction was public, humiliating, and violent. The myth answers that humiliation by imagining that the true order was never defeated. The outer shell fell, but the inner secret continued. The king took the buildings. The courts took the confessions. The documents named an ending. But somewhere, according to the legend, the essential thing escaped. That fantasy is deeply human. We want meaning to survive power. We want the persecuted to have kept one card hidden. We want history's victims, or at least its most dramatic losers, to possess a final advantage no executioner could reach. The Templars are perfect for that desire because their end feels both documented and unfinished. And Antarctica gives that unfinished feeling a physical form, a continent at the end of the world, a place where continuity could hide without witnesses, a landscape large enough to hold all the symbolic weight later centuries placed on a fallen medieval order. But once again, the symbol outruns the evidence. The Templars did influence imagination. Their image did pass into later traditions. Their name did become a shorthand for secrecy. Those things are real. What has not been shown is an unbroken historical path from the medieval order to a hidden Antarctic presence. The legend depends on confusing those two realities, and when we separate them, the mystery changes. It becomes less a story about knights secretly ruling from beneath the ice, and more a story about how symbols survive long after institutions die. The Templars reached Antarctica not by ship, not by authenticated map, not by documented voyage, but through the strange migration of meaning. Their cross traveled farther than their bodies ever did. And in the end, that may be the only journey we can prove. At some point, every serious version of this legend has to leave the atmosphere and enter the evidence room. It is not the most romantic room in the building. There are no torchlit passages here, no dramatic seal pressed into red wax, no hooded figure turning away at the last second, just the dull, necessary furniture of historical proof, dates, provenance, material analysis, reliable documents, archaeological context, and records that can survive contact with skeptical questions. For a story as large as Templars in Antarctica, the evidence would need to be unusually strong, not interesting, not suggestive. Strong. That difference matters because weak clues can look impressive when they are gathered together under dim lighting. A strange map here, missing treasure there, a rumor of ships, a symbolic connection, a restricted zone, a gap in the record. Place them close enough, and they begin to feel like a pattern. But a pattern in the imagination is not the same as a chain of evidence. A chain has links. Each one must hold. So what would actually be needed? First, we would need a dated artifact, something physically connected to the medieval Templars. Antarctica under conditions that could be independently examined. A seal, a weapon, a coin, a piece of carved stone, a religious object, a document container. But even that would not be enough by itself. The artifact would need context. Where exactly was it found? In what layer? Was the site disturbed? Could it have been brought there in the modern period? Is the object genuine or a later reproduction? Can multiple specialists examine it without being asked to accept a story in advance? Because objects can travel long after their original owners are gone. A medieval coin in a strange place does not automatically prove a medieval expedition. It may prove trade, collection, contamination, mislabeling, hoax, or modern transport. Archaeology is careful for a reason. It has learned, sometimes painfully, that the most exciting object in the room is often the one most in need of suspicion. Second, we would need travel records. Not necessarily a neat diary saying, "Today we sailed toward the frozen continent," because history is rarely that generous, but we would need something close to the period. Port records, cargo lists, letters, financial accounts, legal testimony, ship inventories, orders, payments, or references to unusual voyages that can be placed within a real medieval context. A voyage of that scale would not be impossible to hide in one document, but to hide every trace, the preparation, the crew, the supplies, the financing, the return, the deaths, the consequences, is a much larger claim. And larger claims leave larger shadows. Third, we would need authenticated maps. Not simply maps that look intriguing when compared loosely to modern coastlines. We would need a map with a clear provenance, a reliable date, and features that are specific enough to indicate genuine knowledge rather than theory, distortion, or coincidence. Better still, we would need evidence that such a map passed through Templar hands. A library inventory, a marginal note, a seal, a reference in correspondence, some documented chain connecting the object to the order. Without that chain, the map may still be fascinating, but it is not Templar evidence. Fourth, we would need archaeology on the Antarctic side. Not a single isolated object, but a site. Human activity leaves mess. Even disciplined humans leave mess. A camp, a shelter, a landing place, tool marks, organic remains, fuel traces, worked materials, burial evidence, imported wood, metal fragments, textiles, food remains, something that shows people were there and when they were there. The colder the place, the better preservation might be. That is the strange promise of Antarctica. If something human had survived in the ice under the right conditions, it might be extraordinarily revealing. But that same promise cuts both ways. Preservation raises expectations. If a medieval presence existed, we would hope for more than rumor. We would hope for something testable. And so far, for the Templar claim, that accepted evidence has not appeared. No recognized body of archaeological evidence proves that the Knights Templar reached Antarctica. No authenticated medieval document confirms a southern voyage by the order. No accepted map tradition has shown a direct Templar chain leading to Antarctic knowledge. No confirmed Templar site has been identified beneath the ice. That is the honest state of the case. It is not as exciting as a hidden fortress, but it is cleaner. And clean matters here, because the legend often survives by making the standard of proof move whenever the evidence fails to arrive. If no artifacts are found, perhaps they are buried deeper. If no documents appear, perhaps they were destroyed. If no maps survive, perhaps they are locked away. If experts disagree, perhaps they are part of the concealment. If the claim cannot be tested, perhaps that is because the secret is too important. This kind of reasoning is dangerous because it can protect any story from failure. A theory that explains every absence as proof of suppression has stopped behaving like investigation. It has become immune to correction. And once a story becomes immune to correction, it may still be entertaining, but it is no longer historical. A real investigation must allow the possibility that the answer is no. That is not a lack of imagination. It is discipline. The Templar Antarctica legend asks us to connect a medieval order to a continent far outside the confirmed reach of its world. That connection is not impossible in the way a fairy tale is impossible. Human beings have traveled astonishing distances. Knowledge has moved in strange ways. Lost objects do reappear. Archives do surprise us. History is large enough to embarrass certainty, but embarrassment is not a method. We cannot use the possibility of surprise as proof that a specific surprise has occurred. The evidence would have to meet the scale of the claim, and at present, it does not. Still, there is value in laying out the standard, because it changes how we listen to the legend. We stop asking whether the story feels mysterious and start asking whether it can be tested. We stop mistaking atmosphere for documentation. We stop allowing every blank space to serve as a hiding place for whatever we want to believe. And perhaps most importantly, we give the mystery a fair trial. Not a trial designed to humiliate it, a fair one. Because if evidence ever did appear, a properly dated object, a credible document, a verifiable site, it would deserve attention. It would deserve careful study, not automatic dismissal. But until then, the responsible answer remains firm. The connection is unproven. The Templars had a real history. Antarctica has real secrets. The bridge between them has not been built with evidence strong enough to stand. And so the story remains where many powerful legends remain, outside the archive, pressing its face against the glass. Some clues are compelling because they are strong. Others are compelling because they are lonely. They sit in the margins of history without enough context around them, and the imagination begins to do what imagination does best. It connects them. A strange map, a vanished treasure, a fleet no one can clearly account for, a southern continent drawn before it was fully known, a powerful order destroyed under suspicious political pressure, a modern polar landscape that most people will never see. None of these details, by itself, proves the Templars reached Antarctica, but together, they create a mood, and mood can be mistaken for momentum. This is one of the reasons the legend survives so well. It does not usually depend on one single piece of evidence. If it did, the matter would be easier. That evidence could be examined, dated, authenticated, challenged, or dismissed. Instead, the story is built from a scatter of suggestive fragments. Each one is just loose enough to resist final judgment, and just strange enough to invite another question. The missing treasure is the first fragment. The Templars were wealthy. Their fall was sudden. Their assets were targeted. It is not absurd to wonder whether everything was recovered neatly. In moments of danger, people hide things. Institutions move resources. Loyal members may act before officials arrive. That basic instinct is believable. But the leap from some assets may not have been immediately seized to a secret treasure crossed the world and ended beneath Antarctic ice is enormous. The first idea belongs to historical caution. The second belongs to legend. Then there are the ships. A hidden fleet is the perfect vehicle for a hidden treasure. It gives the story motion. It allows the Order's secret to escape the landlocked machinery of royal courts and church councils. A ship can leave before the authorities understand what is gone. It can pass into fog, change ports, lose its name, and become almost impossible to follow in records that were never complete to begin with. But again, the story outruns the proof. There is a difference between maritime capability and a polar voyage, a difference between missing records and deliberate disappearance, a difference between a ship leaving port and a ship reaching the far southern world. The legend compresses those differences until the journey feels almost natural. But history does not compress so politely. It asks for the hard middle: routes, supplies, crews, purposes, and traces. Then come the maps. Old maps are perhaps the most seductive clues of all, because they appear to show something. They have lines, names, shapes, authority. They let speculation dress itself in ink. If a southern land appears on a map before Antarctica was confirmed, the mind wants to treat that as a message smuggled across time. But old maps are not simple witnesses. They contain observation and error, theory and inheritance, guesswork and copying. They can preserve real information in one region while inventing another. They can look more accurate to modernize than they were intended to be. Most importantly, they can be misread by people who already know the outline of the world and are searching backward for it. This is a quiet but serious problem. We do not look at old maps innocently. We bring Antarctica with us. We bring satellite outlines, schoolroom globes, and centuries of later knowledge. When we see a southern curve, we may recognize what the mapmaker never meant to claim. The resemblance may still be interesting, but resemblance is not identification. And identification is not proof of Templar ownership. The secret roots form another fragment. There is a long tradition of imagining that medieval or ancient travelers knew more about the world than official discovery narratives admit. Sometimes that instinct is healthy. Official discovery stories can be arrogant. They often center European confirmation as if a place did not fully exist until Europeans wrote it down. Other cultures traveled, mapped, remembered, and named places within their own worlds long before outside powers arrived. So yes, we should be careful with triumphal timelines. But correcting arrogance is not the same as accepting every alternative claim. A secret route must still be shown. A pre-modern voyage must still leave evidence. A tradition of maritime knowledge must be traced, not merely invoked. Otherwise, official history is incomplete, becomes a magic phrase that can make any missing bridge appear. And then there are the gaps in the record. Gaps feel suspicious because they resemble concealment. But a gap can mean many things. It can mean destroyed documents. It can mean poor preservation. It can mean no one considered the matter worth recording. It can mean records existed in a local archive and were lost to fire, water, war, insects, neglect, or simple administrative boredom. History is not a perfect surveillance system. It is a damaged net. The legend treats every hole in that net as if something large must have escaped through it. Sometimes that is true. Often it is not. This is where a careful investigation has to resist the pleasure of accumulation. 10 weak clues do not automatically become one strong proof. They may become a stronger question. They may justify curiosity. They may show why a theory became attractive. But unless the clues connect in a way that can be tested, they remain fragments arranged by desire. That does not make them worthless. In fact, suspicious details are often extremely valuable, not because they prove the legend, but because they reveal how the legend was built. They show which parts of history felt unfinished. They show which absences people could not stop noticing. They show how real uncertainty becomes mythic certainty after enough retellings. The missing treasure answers our suspicion that power never tells us everything. The hidden fleet answers our wish that the doomed order escaped at the last moment. The strange maps answer our hope that the past knew more than we do. The Antarctic setting answers our need for a place still large enough to hide the impossible. Each clue contributes something emotionally precise, but none of them, as they currently stand, delivers the historical proof required. That is the difficult balance. We should not mock the mystery simply because it is unproven. Mockery is often just laziness wearing confidence. But we should not inflate the mystery either. Inflation is how speculation becomes fake history, and fake history has a way of flattening the real past into scenery. The real Templars do not need Antarctica to be interesting. Their rise and fall were already shaped by faith, war, finance, ambition, fear, and political violence. Their destruction already left enough unanswered questions to occupy historians without sending them under polar ice. And Antarctica does not need the Templars to be mysterious. Its real hidden worlds, its deep ice, subglacial lakes, meteorites, and ancient climate records are astonishing without a medieval treasure chest placed inside them. The legend becomes most interesting when we let both truths stand. The clues are compelling. They are not enough, and perhaps that is why they keep working. A complete proof would end the story. A complete disproof would end it too. But a cluster of suggestive details, none decisive, keeps the mind moving. It allows belief and doubt to circle each other without either one landing the final blow. That is the true engine of the Templar Antarctica myth. Not evidence strong enough to settle the case. Evidence-shaped fragments strong enough to keep the case alive. At this point, the legend begins to reveal its construction. Not as one ancient secret passed down intact, but as a structure assembled from many different myths, each bringing its own furniture into the room. There is the Templar treasure myth, the idea that something precious survived the fall of the order and slipped beyond the reach of kings. There is the ancient map myth, the belief that old charts preserve knowledge the modern world has forgotten or misunderstood. There is the Terra Australis tradition, the long shadow of a southern land imagined before it was confirmed. There is the secret society myth, The conviction that certain groups carry hidden knowledge across centuries under symbols, rituals, and coded loyalties. There is the lost civilization myth, the hope or fear that earlier peoples knew the world more deeply than we do. And finally, there is the modern Antarctic secrecy myth, the feeling that a remote, restricted, scientific continent must be hiding something more than weather stations and ice cores. The Templar Antarctica story is what happens when these myths are stacked together. Each layer strengthens the one above it. The missing treasure needs a hiding place. Antarctica provides one. The old maps need an owner. The Templars provide one. The secret societies need an origin. The medieval order provides a dramatic ancestor. The Antarctic restrictions need a reason, at least in the suspicious imagination. A hidden archive provides one, and the whole structure begins to feel older, deeper, and more coherent than its separate parts really are. This is how many powerful legends are built. Not by inventing everything from nothing, but by joining existing ideas until the seams become hard to see. A little documented history, a little genuine uncertainty, a little cartographic mystery, a little symbolic inheritance, a little distrust of institutions, a little longing for buried knowledge. Mix them carefully, and a theory can begin to feel as if it has always existed. But when we separate the ingredients, the spell changes. The Templars really did exist. Their order really did fall. Their reputation really did expand after their destruction. Old maps really can be strange. Antarctica really was imagined before it was confirmed. Modern Antarctica really is difficult to access. These statements are solid enough. The problem begins when they are fused into one claim, that the Knights Templar reached, knew, or hid something in Antarctica. That fusion is not supported by accepted historical evidence. It is an interpretation built across gaps, and the gaps do not disappear simply because the story crossing them is elegant. In fact, elegance may be the warning. Real history is rarely so thematically perfect. It does not usually arrange its symbols for us. A vanished order with a red cross beneath a white continent. A lost treasure preserved in ice. An ancient map pointing toward a forbidden south. It is beautiful in the way a myth is beautiful. Balanced, resonant, almost too clean. History, by contrast, is messy. Its records are partial. Its motives conflict. Its endings are often disappointing. Wealth is confiscated and spent. Documents rot. People lie for ordinary reasons. Expeditions fail without leaving poetry behind. Institutions collapse not into secret immortality, but into lawsuits, debts, reassigned properties, and tired survivors trying to stay alive. That is not less interesting. It is simply less theatrical. The legend improves the past by giving it narrative justice. The Templars are destroyed, but not really. Their treasure is seized, but not all of it. Their knowledge is suppressed, but preserved. The known world expands, but only after someone already knew the secret. Antarctica is explored, but not truly opened. Every official ending receives a hidden continuation. That is the emotional architecture of the myth. And it is powerful because it satisfies a hunger that ordinary history often leaves untouched. The hunger for continuity beneath rupture. We do not like the idea that something great can simply end. We want a remnant, a survivor, a sealed chamber, a final message sent ahead into darkness. The Templars give us the rupture. Antarctica gives us the chamber. But once we understand this, dismantling the legend does not have to kill its atmosphere. It may actually make the atmosphere richer. Because the mystery shifts from, what did the Templars hide under the ice, to, why did so many separate myths find each other there? That second question is less flashy, but it reaches deeper. It asks why lost treasure stories cling to fallen orders, why old maps are treated as coded revelations, why distant places become containers for forbidden knowledge, why secret societies are imagined as bridges across centuries, why scientific remoteness is so easily mistaken for concealment, why the human mind turns blank spaces into locked rooms, and perhaps most of all, it asks why we prefer a hidden plan to an unfinished record. A hidden plan has shape. It implies intelligence. It says the mystery exists because someone made it. An unfinished record is colder. It says the past is broken because time breaks things. No mastermind required. No vault. No coded inheritance. Just loss. That is harder to accept, so the legend gathers fragments and gives them purpose. It takes the disorder of history and arranges it into a pattern that feels intentional. Even doubt becomes part of the design. The lack of evidence is treated not as a weakness, but as a sign of how well the secret was kept. This is the moment a legend becomes difficult to argue with, not because it is strong, but because it is flexible. Remove one support, and another takes its place. Question the treasure, and the story moves to maps. Question the maps, and it moves to secret societies. Question secret societies, and it moves to restricted zones. Question the restricted zones, and it moves beneath the ice, where no ordinary person can look. The legend survives by changing rooms, but if we are patient, we can still see the building. It is made from real history, but it is not the same as history. It is made from real places, but it is not the same as geography. It is made from real uncertainty, but it is not the same as evidence. And that distinction matters, because false mysteries can sometimes bury real ones. When Antarctica becomes only a stage for medieval conspiracy, we may miss what is genuinely extraordinary about it. When the Templars become only universal keepers of every secret, we may miss the specific tragedy and complexity of their real story. Myth can illuminate, but it can also flatten. The best way to honor a legend is not always to believe it. Sometimes it is to understand what made it necessary. The Templar Antarctica myth is likely not a single buried truth waiting under the ice. It is a meeting point, a frozen crossroads where older anxieties gather. The fear that history is incomplete. The suspicion that power hides what it cannot destroy. The hope that lost knowledge has not truly vanished. The desire for one last place on Earth where the impossible might still be waiting. That is why the story works. Not because its pieces prove the claim, because its pieces know how to haunt each other. Maybe the real secret was never a vault. That sounds less thrilling at first, especially after ships, maps, missing treasure, and the cold perfection of Antarctica. A vault gives the mind something to hold. It has walls, it has a lock, it has an answer inside. You can imagine a door under blue ice, a chamber untouched by time, a sealed container waiting for the right generation to open it. But history is not always kind enough to hide its secrets in rooms. Sometimes the secret is the pattern itself. The Templar Antarctica legend may tell us less about what medieval knights carried south, and more about what modern people do when history leaves them unsatisfied. We take gaps and make architecture from them. We take missing records and imagine deliberate silence. We take a fallen order and refuse to let it fall completely. We take a remote continent and turn distance into intention. This is not stupidity. It is storytelling under pressure. Human beings are not comfortable with broken endings. We can accept tragedy sometimes. We can accept loss if it has shape. But random loss, bureaucratic loss, ordinary historical disappearance, those are harder to bear. They feel too flat, too wasteful, too much like the world misplacing something important and then shrugging. The Templars suffered exactly that kind of transformation. Their real end was dramatic, but also administrative. Arrests, proceedings, confiscations, transfers of property, statements taken under pressure, decisions made by men with political needs and legal authority. The romance of the order was dragged into the machinery of power, and machinery is not satisfying. It grinds, it files, it stamps, it reduces a grand institution into cases, assets, accusations, and settlements. Legend repairs that insult. It says, no, not everything was taken. It says, something escaped. It says, beneath the official ending, there was another story. That is the emotional force behind so many Templar myths. They give the defeated order a final victory, not on a battlefield, but in secrecy. The king may seize the buildings, the courts may condemn the leaders, the documents may declare the order finished, but somewhere beyond the reach of the official record, the legend imagines a hidden continuity, and Antarctica makes that continuity feel almost sacred. Not sacred in a strictly religious sense, but sacred as in removed from ordinary use. Set apart. Untouchable. The continent becomes a place where the past can be protected from the noise of the present. It is not crowded, commercial, or familiar. It does not feel owned by everyday life. It feels like one of the few remaining places where a secret could remain large. So the real secret may be this: Antarctica is not hiding the Templars. The Templars are helping us explain Antarctica. They give a human face to a continent that otherwise resists human drama. The ice does not care about our symbols. It does not arrange itself into plot. It preserves climate, stone, air, and pressure with a patience that makes human ambition look brief. But we prefer mysteries with intention. We prefer to believe that if something is hidden, someone hid it. If there is a blank space, someone made it blank. If we cannot enter, someone must be keeping us out. The Templar myth supplies that someone. A vanished order is easier to imagine than indifferent geology. A secret archive is easier to desire than a million years of compressed snow. A hidden treasure is easier to narrate than the slow, difficult work of ice science. So the legend translates Antarctica into human terms. It turns cold into concealment. It turns distance into strategy. It turns natural silence into chosen silence. That is what myths often do. They do not always invent meaning from nothing. They convert one kind of mystery into another kind, one more suited to human appetite. The real mystery of Antarctica is vast, ancient, and impersonal. The mythic mystery is personal. Someone knew, someone hid, someone guarded, someone lied. And the Templars, because of their history, are perfect for that conversion. They stand at the intersection of faith and violence, wealth and accusation, loyalty and betrayal. They were powerful enough to seem dangerous, secretive enough to seem unknowable, and destroyed thoroughly enough to become available for reinvention. Once they entered legend, they became a kind of symbolic key, not because they unlock the facts, but because they unlock a feeling. The feeling that history has a hidden underside. The feeling that the official story is never the full story. The feeling that somewhere, sealed away from ordinary people, there is proof that the world was stranger than we were taught. That feeling can be seductive. It can also be dangerous. Because when we want hidden meaning too badly, we may begin to disrespect the real past. We may treat evidence as an obstacle rather than a guide. We may turn actual people into props for our suspicion. The historical Templars become less important than the role we need them to play. Antarctica becomes less a continent than a screen for projection. The mystery becomes less an investigation than a mood we are reluctant to lose. But the answer is not to kill the mood. The answer is to ask better questions inside it. Why does a missing treasure attract more attention than confiscated property? Why does a speculative map feel more powerful than a careful archive? Why does a blank space seem more honest to us than an expert explanation? Why do we so often assume that secrecy is more likely than loss? These questions do not lead to an underground fortress. They lead to something closer. They lead to us. To the way we handle uncertainty. To the way we mistrust clean endings. To the way we sense, correctly, that history is incomplete, but then sometimes leap too quickly toward the most cinematic explanation. That instinct is not entirely wrong. History is incomplete. Records are biased. Power does conceal. Victors do edit. Archives do exclude. Official stories can be partial, polished, and self-protective. But that truth is not a license to believe anything. It is an invitation to investigate more carefully. The Templar Antarctica legend survives because it sits exactly at that tension. It offers the pleasure of suspicion while borrowing the dignity of real historical gaps. It is not pure fantasy. It touches real things, a real order, a real collapse, real map traditions, a real southern continent, real limits on access, real human uncertainty. But the connection it builds between them remains unproven, and maybe that is why it is so revealing. A proven Templar vault would be an archaeological discovery. An unproven Templar vault is a cultural mirror. It shows what we hope is still buried. Not only gold, not only relics, not only forbidden maps, but a deeper confirmation that the world has not been fully explained. That somewhere beneath the surface of accepted history, there are chapters still intact, waiting for the right question. The real secret, then, may not be under the ice. It may be in the hunger that sends us looking there. Antarctica gives no answer quickly. That is part of its power. Most mysteries, when brought into daylight, begin to shrink. A document is examined. A date is checked. A map is compared against its sources. An artifact is tested. A rumor is traced backward until it reaches a book, a lecture, a mistranslation, a wish. The world becomes smaller under investigation, and sometimes that is a relief. But Antarctica resists that kind of shrinking. Even when we know more about it, it still feels distant. Even when it is photographed from orbit, crossed by aircraft, studied by scientists, and measured by instruments, it does not become familiar in the ordinary human sense. It remains too large, too cold, too severe, too indifferent to our need for closure. That is why the Templar legend can return there again and again. Not because the evidence becomes stronger, because the silence remains convincing. A continent does not have to speak in order to be interpreted. In fact, silence may be the easiest thing in the world to misread. We can place almost anything inside it. A lost order, a forbidden archive, a treasure carried across impossible waters, a map that knew too much, a history beneath the history. And the ice does not object. That is the strange generosity of remote places. They allow stories to survive longer than they might survive. Put the same claim in a crowded city, and someone will ask for a street name. Put it in a known castle, and someone will ask for excavation reports. Put it beneath Antarctica, and the question changes. Not where exactly, but who could even check. The mystery benefits from the difficulty of refusal, but difficulty is not proof. After following the legend through its strongest images, the answer remains stubbornly plain. There is no accepted historical evidence that the Knights Templar reached Antarctica, hid treasure there, built anything there, or preserved Antarctic knowledge through a verified chain of maps and records. The connection remains unproven. That sentence may feel almost too small for the story around it, but it has to stand. Because honest mystery is not the same as endless possibility. A mystery can be fascinating and still fail as a historical claim. A theory can reveal something true about imagination without proving something true about the past. The Templar Antarctica story belongs, for now, in that uneasy category. It is not a confirmed secret history. It is a legend built from the materials of secrecy, and still, the absence of certainty keeps it alive. There is a particular kind of story that does not survive despite missing evidence, but because of it. The missing piece becomes the engine. The unanswered question becomes the sacred object. Every failed search can be folded back into the myth as proof of how well the secret was hidden. That is why the legend is so difficult to end. The Templars are gone, which makes them available. The treasure is uncertain, which makes it movable. The maps are ambiguous, which makes them useful. Antarctica is remote, which makes it protective. Each uncertainty passes the story to the next, like a candle carried through a long corridor. By the time we ask for hard proof, the legend has already changed the subject from evidence to possibility. And possibility is addictive. It lets us stand at the edge of the known world and feel that the old adventure has not entirely ended. It lets us believe that history still has locked compartments. It lets us imagine that somewhere beyond the reach of ordinary archives, there is a final page that would rearrange everything. But perhaps the most important thing Antarctica gives this story is not concealment. It is scale. A small hiding place produces a small secret. Antarctica makes any secret placed within it feel monumental. A box under a floorboard is suspicious. A box under the ice at the bottom of the world becomes mythic. The continent enlarges whatever touches it. Even an unsupported rumor comes back wearing the weight of glaciers. That is why the setting can overpower the evidence. We see the white expanse and feel that something must be worthy of it. We confuse vastness with significance. We assume that a place so difficult to reach must be guarding something equally difficult to understand. But the continent may be guarding nothing human at all. It may simply be itself, immense, dangerous, beautiful, and mostly uninterested in our medieval dramas. The wind does not preserve the Templar legend out of loyalty. The ice does not know the Red Cross. The mountains beneath the snow were ancient before the order was founded, and they will remain after every rumor about it has faded into another form. That indifference is sobering. It is also strangely freeing, because it lets us see the legend clearly without needing to hate it. The story is not worthless because it is unproven. It is valuable because it shows how myths gather around the places we cannot easily reach. It shows how a real historical wound, the destruction of the Templars, can keep bleeding into unrelated mysteries centuries later. It shows how human beings use geography to store uncertainty. Antarctica becomes a container for unfinished history. Not because history placed something there, because we did. And maybe that is the quiet answer the continent gives, if it gives any answer at all. It does not confirm the legend. It reflects it back at us in colder form. It asks whether we are searching for evidence or for the feeling that evidence might still be out there. It asks whether we want the truth or whether we want the story to remain just beyond reach. That is not a comfortable question, but it is the right one. Because the Templar-Antarctica connection survives in the space between knowledge and longing. Too much certainty would kill it. Too much absurdity would weaken it. But a remote continent, a fallen order, a few strange maps, and a century of retellings. That is enough to keep the door slightly open. Not open enough to walk through, just open enough to keep looking. And so Antarctica remains what it has always been in this story. Silent, cinematic, and uncooperative. It offers no confession. It hands over no relic. It reveals no medieval harbor beneath the ice. It simply waits, and in that waiting, the legend finds its final shelter. There may be no fortress beneath the ice, no Templar chapel sealed under a glacier, no medieval archive waiting in a chamber of blue light, no treasure fleet sleeping beneath the snow with its sails folded like relics. The careful answer, after everything, is still the same. The Templar connection to Antarctica remains unproven. But the story survives because it was never only asking for proof. It was asking for a place large enough to hold our suspicion that history is incomplete. And Antarctica is almost perfect for that. It is not just distant. It is final. On the map, it sits like a full stop at the bottom of the world, a continent that seems to say, beyond here, ordinary certainty ends. For a legend, that is priceless. You can place almost anything there, and it will feel heavier, older, more difficult to dismiss. The Templars bring the other half of the spell. They are a real order with a real collapse. But their ending left behind the kind of emotional debris that legends love. Missing wealth, broken power, accusations, suppression, survivors whose later lives blur into rumor, a story that looks finished in official records, but not finished in the imagination. When those two forces meet, the vanished order and the unreachable continent, the result feels less like a claim and more like a wound in the map. That is why the legend matters, even if the evidence does not carry it. It reveals the shape of a very old human obsession. The belief that somewhere, beyond the approved archive, there are buried chapters of our story. Chapters removed, hidden, frozen, or deliberately misfiled. We know history is incomplete. We know records burn, rulers lie, institutions protect themselves, and entire worlds can vanish without leaving enough behind. That knowledge is real. The danger comes when we fill every gap with the answer we most want. The Templar Antarctica myth is compelling because it takes real absences and gives them intention. The treasure was not merely lost, it was moved. The maps were not merely speculative, they were inherited. Antarctica is not merely remote, it is guarding something. The silence is not merely silence, it is secrecy. And that is the turn where mystery becomes mythology. Still, there is something beautiful in the impulse if we handle it carefully. It comes from a refusal to believe that the past is fully dead. It comes from the feeling that human history is deeper, stranger, and less completely catalogued than any clean timeline can suggest. In that feeling, there is truth, not proof of Templars under the ice, but proof that the past continues to trouble us. Perhaps that is the final secret. Not an object, not a map, not a vault. A question. Why do we keep searching the coldest place on Earth for the things history failed to explain? Maybe because Antarctica gives our uncertainty a body. It turns doubt into landscape. It lets us imagine that what was lost has not decayed, but waited, preserved, suspended, still possible. The ice is powerful because it does not answer back. It allows belief and skepticism to stand side by side, both seeing what they came to see. The believer sees concealment. The skeptic sees absence. The historian sees a claim without sufficient evidence. The storyteller sees something else, a mirror, vast and white, reflecting our need for hidden meaning. And maybe that is where this investigation has to end, not with a door opening under the ice, but with the recognition that some legends survive because they express a truth deeper than their facts. The Templars probably did not reach Antarctica, but the idea that they did tells us something about us, about our distrust of official endings, our hunger for lost knowledge, and our refusal to accept that every missing thing is simply gone. So the continent remains. Cold, silent, unimpressed. No confession rises from the snow. No medieval seal appears in the ice. No lost fleet breaks through the white horizon. Only the question remains beneath it all. And perhaps that is enough. Because somewhere in the human mind, there is still a belief that history has not surrendered all of its secrets. That beneath the surface of what we know, there are chapters waiting in darkness, in distance, in the places we cannot easily reach. Not every buried chapter is real, but the hunger to find one is. And so, beneath the ice, the Templars become less an answer than a symbol of the unfinished past, of the missing page, of the secret we keep hoping the world has saved for us. Antarctica gives no proof, only room. And in that room, the legend keeps breathing.